Hello, I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of the San Francisco Conservative, a new podcast series. I'm your co-host, your interrogator, interviewer, host, co-host. I'm a former journalist at CBS News, CNN, Good Morning America, and so on. And I love stimulating conversation. And for the past couple of years, I've known exactly where to find that by speaking with my dear friend, David Parker, who's joining us from San Francisco. Hey, David, how are you today?
I'm fine. I never asked you, but how are you today?
I'm doing very well. I'm on the other coast. I appreciate that. No, I'm on the other coast in Connecticut.
Yeah.
My wife and I found a little house on the water here, and it's a beautiful spring day. It's daffodil season here in Connecticut, which if I had to pinpoint a season, I'd say that's my favorite. So it's very nice. So thank you.
You're the other coast, but we have a better name. We're West Coast. Everyone knows what that means.
My New Yorker, I used to live in New York City. My New Yorker friends talk about that other coast. Yeah, exactly.
No, you're the other coast. We're the West Coast. We have a name.
Today I wanted to talk about, David, of course, is the author of two wonderful books, very thought-provoking books, Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative. The second book, the most recent book, gives this podcast series its title, of course. And I wanted to touch on a topic that's of interest to folks in California and Connecticut and everywhere in between in this United States of America, and that is education. David, for people who don't know your background that well, tell us, I mean, you've devoted really a lifetime to education, your own and to several younger generations, right? Tell us about that.
I've always taught school. One reason is it keeps me grounded, or kept me grounded. I taught 40 years. I didn't teach full time the whole 40 years, but at the beginning I did. I was always teaching 2 or 3 days a week, so I was really part of the faculty. And then when I retired, I went back and did 10 more years as a volunteer, inner city schools. My kids went to better schools, but they went to public schools, as did I. And I just loved the environment, and I loved comparing the students I was teaching with my own children. And I just was so clear. I don't care what their social or economic background was. They were talking about the same things as my children were talking about. They had the same reactions to stuff. They had the same lunch boxes with the Ninja Turtles on, and it was really an eye opener. And almost like from my second semester teaching, I had a realization that kept me going through the whole career: is don't underestimate people. You know, I'm coming into an environment I didn't grow up in myself, and sometimes the responses of the kids were off or slow, and I realized that's just don't go there. They're everybody is smarter than you think. And even their parents would come in for a teacher conference, and they would ask questions about themselves and says, "This is not about you, it's about your child." But I answer the question and go on. And I realized that anybody, a student or parent, can be mixed up at any moment in their life. And all you do is tell them you're off. This, in my opinion, you're off. And and it registers. Don't underestimate people.
Yeah, no, that's
what I take away from 40 years of teaching.
I love it. That's a great lesson, a great insight. I mean, I sometimes talk with my friends. A lot of my friends are in the quote unquote personal development movement, speakers, coaches, authors, and a lot of them we often talk about. Again, we've been studying that great classic book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And he says, we all learn from experience. You want to be determined and clear and focused, but you can't really be expected to know everything, right out of the womb. So and then mentioned, Thomas Edison and Henry Ford were contemporaries way back then, 100 years ago. And, sort of the classic line, Thomas Edison, said, "Thomas Edison, how do you feel? You failed 10,000 times to invent the incandescent light bulb." And he said, no, I've just found 10,000 ways it doesn't work. So I know I'm on a great path to find the one that does. And of course he did. So,
Right.
it's interesting.
You mentioned Thomas Edison and Henry Ford in the same sentence. They both of them also had in common, they were almost uneducated.
Interesting.
And people don't know that. Because if you, once you become focused on something, everything is self-learning anyway. The teacher, their job is to motivate students and maybe facilitate learning. If you see why the student doesn't grasp something, maybe orally, they might grasp it visually. So that's what a good teacher does. They pick up immediately why a student isn't picking up. But otherwise, all the work is the student. So you learn quickly once you begin applying yourself.
Well, it's interesting. I've been reading your new book, A San Francisco Conservative, and there's a chapter, speaking of education, there's a chapter here that you title Letter to the Board of Education. And from the very beginning of this chapter, you say, the purpose of education is not to teach young people how to succeed, right? What can you elaborate on that?
I mean, an education will help them in life. I'm not saying that's not the case, but that's not the purpose or the original purpose. And we should never forget the original purpose of what I call publicly funded education. It's Thomas Jefferson who started that. And he says that the democracy is so fragile. We're going to lose it. I mean, we built it, we fought for it, and here it is. And we built the Constitution, but we're going to lose it. If the citizens are not educated, at least can read and can do some math and know some history. Those three things he thought should be the core curriculum, because then a citizen can recognize when a politician is saying something that's not correct. Historically, it's not correct, or the math doesn't add up. This is not going to work. And you have to be able to read it at a certain level. So that's why we have that's why he wanted publicly funded education for parents who couldn't afford it. But the founding fathers and Thomas Jefferson himself never conceived, wouldn't have crossed their mind that the state would administer the education. This is a couple hundred years before communism, I suppose, but they never, that was not in their mind. The schools were doing, if the school was good, the parent would choose it. If the school wasn't good, they wouldn't go to that school. That's easy to come. You can go just observe the school or look at the children walking around. If they're, you can tell if a school is good or not. You can ask your neighbors, and then you go to that school, and it's like a voucher in a way. This state would fund it for the parents if they couldn't afford it. If they couldn't afford it, and most people could. So it was just to make sure everybody was getting an education. It's not about, this is a chance to pull yourself out of poverty. That's not the purpose of public schools.
Yeah, no, good point. Very, very interesting.
In fact, we talked about Edison and Ford. They hardly went to school. It isn't really necessary. Standards are so low in public schools. That I know, because I know what I taught when I started, and I taught the same grades pretty much. I know what I taught at the end. One half.
Yeah.
The curriculum is so low. So it used to be a rule of thumb when I was a kid. All you needed was a third grade education. So you can read the newspaper and you know what you're doing. That's all you needed. Today you need maybe an 8th grade education.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Standards were so much higher 50 years ago, incredibly higher. And they were higher 50 years before that. Turn of the century, look at I've seen some sample exams. It's like you're in Europe or Asia or something. It's really on a much higher level.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I have another follow-up question there. I just want to throw in, if anybody's joining us midway here through our episode of A San Francisco Conservative, that is the title of our podcast series. And that's in homage to David Parker's newest book, A San Francisco Conservative. And his prior book is Income and Wealth. And both books are very thought-provoking. And today we're talking about education, because that's what David has really devoted his life to. And it's a lot of insights that I think are, great wake-up calls to maybe some changes that we can make Another idea that you mentioned in the chapter on education in your book, your newest book, points out that America is very unique. I've always felt that America is unique, but how do you mean America is unique in terms of the content that's taught in our classrooms?
Well, we're lucky to have had the founding fathers. In my opinion, there are three great moments in Western civilization. In that sense, it's three great moments in world history. It was 5th century Athens. Everything we know about everything, they figured out. The kids if they're doing a geometry class, it's Euclid. If they're studying architecture, art, or poetry, or philosophy, or biology, all the work of Aristotle in biology, not just politics and philosophy. Everything we know comes from the Greeks. This is this moment in history when God threw a lightning bolt and hit 5th century Athens, a city of 100 or 200,000 people. And then we had a big hit again. God threw another bolt, 1st century Rome, and we developed laws of government and reasoning that were very, very high and beautiful. And then he hit again with the 18th century, 17th and 18th century Age of Enlightenment. The United States had all these geniuses sitting here at the same time, just like Athens had all those geniuses at the same time. We had them here, and Europe been building up as being such an autocratic and such an inhumane place. We picked up all the best, like even now, we pick up the best people of the world. I read an article, I think in yesterday's New York Times, that Ukraine has lost a couple 100,000. No, Russia has lost a couple 100,000 of their high-tech workers. They just go on vacation and they don't come back because they know what's happening. They get the internet, even if the nation's blocking it, they're getting the internet, and they know what they're doing, and they're leaving and not coming back. So Russia is going to suffer in so many hidden ways for what they're doing. And that's and when we benefited from European world history, from Asian world history, and the best people, Latin American world history, even if they're sneaking across the border like they're not supposed to, it's a big step for a family to do. Just start walking into the desert because they know that they have to. Their parents feel they have an obligation to raise their children in a better environment, and for themselves if they're young enough. So we have a self-selected population, unlike any nation in the world. Most people are born in the country they are. In America, most people came here or are not very far removed. I'm one generation removed.
Do you think the promise of the Statue of Liberty still rings true, or have times changed now?
No, I guess not. But in the past, people didn't just sneak in. They fit, but we needed workers like we do now. They yelled at Trump when he started to stop that. Can't do immigration control like that. Silicon Valley doesn't. We can't use American workers. They're not good enough. So we need them, and so what I just talked about, the 5th century Athens, 1st century Rome, 18th century Age of Enlightenment, that should be the core curriculum. Or as Thomas Jefferson said, reading, a little math, a little history. That belongs there, and it's not there. We're studying the students are coming home learning about the wrongs that the nation has done, and we have done wrongs. But if you were to put a little graph, here are the wrongs, and here are the rights, and you can reverse that for the rest of the world. Here are the wrongs for the rest of the world. Here are the rights for the rest of the world. It's completely flipped, and our kids aren't getting that message. They're not proud to be here. They're not proud of the Federalist Papers that justified the Constitution, or they're not proud to read Democracy in America by de Tocqueville, who screams in that book to get rid of slavery. What are you doing? You're out of your mind. But beyond that, this is the most responsible nation that's ever existed in the world.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I'll throw in one more thing since I'm talking here. The new Supreme Court nominee, Jackson, is that her name?
I forget her first name, but Brown.
Kalanji Jackson or something. She announced in one of her introductory lessons, this country is the greatest beacon of democracy the world has ever had and known. She keeps saying that. Maybe she wants to get appointed, but he's saying the right thing, and it's true.
Well, she's a real American success story. I think it's Ketanji Brown Jackson. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
But yeah, no, it's interesting. Well, we just have I don't know 4 or 5 minutes left in this episode, but I wanted to touch on two of the ways that sometimes people calling for school reform, education reform, they say we need to give more money to the schools and we need smaller class sizes. Do you think if we did those two things, the problems would be solved?
No. One, money cannot solve problems because education, a good teacher. I remember when the Cosby Show was on, I used to think, hire Bill Cosby when he could teach the whole school at once. You would have every kid, 1,000 kids sitting there, they wouldn't be saying a word. If you listen to everything he said, and he was big on education, by the way. He gave a lot of money to schools.
Yeah, historically black.
They would listen. He could teach 1,000 kids at once. Now, read the chapter, answer the questions at the end of the book, and turn it in, and then we'll talk some more for next week. And everybody would do it. You don't need small classes. Small classes is just to make it easier for the teachers who are always quitting because they can't control it. And what was the other thing?
Well, I was just saying.
Yeah, money and small class sizes. It's a complete joke.
Right.
I'll say more than that. The reason public school test scores have dropped dramatically was because we flooded the schools with money, and the schools figured they had to spend it, and they did. They were taking the kids to the ballet. They were having librarians coming in. They were doing tons of good things. And the time allotted for core curriculum, 3 hours a day, got shut down to about a half an hour a day. If they had lengthened the school day 2 or 3 hours to talk about multiculturalism, to talk about the arts, talk about the wrongs the nation did if they want to, go into slavery in more depth, you have to lengthen the school day 2 or 3 hours if you want to do that. Otherwise, you're just shortchanging core curriculum. And that's why 36% of today's 4th and 8th graders test Department of Education statistics, page 1, whenever you go to that department. 36% of the nation is proficient in reading and math. That is the lowest in the world, probably.
Yeah.
Lowest in the world.
And one of the things you talked about in your chapter on education is what you call the experience gap. What do you mean by that? Or national culture.
Experience gap. Yeah, what I'm talking about, my generation and before especially grew up reading Pericles' funeral oration. It's what the founding fathers read, and they were moved practically to tears. I quote that in my book, San Francisco Conservative, Pericles' funeral oration by Thucydides. You'll cry. It's what this country is all about. It's so the experience gap. We have people walking around this nation do not know what this nation is about historically, and how beautiful the thought process was that created the Constitution and created the Bill of Rights and what we stand for. Our kids are not getting that. They're not reading Democracy in America by de Tocqueville, who's praising the country. They're hearing, you have kids coming home from school. Did white people do anything good?
Right.
Statements like that, I didn't make that up, is what led to the recall of 3 board members in San Francisco. That statement was one of them.
Yeah, I understand.
Kids are growing up. There's an experience gap. That's what I meant, I guess. Yeah.
And I don't know. Here, I guess this is a big question. I probably shouldn't ask a big question when we just have a minute or two left in our episode right now. But do you think that democracy is very fragile? I mean, we have this very challenging time in the world right now in terms of Russia and Ukraine, and we've had episodes like that in the past. As far as we talk about acting to preserve democracy, or as you're saying, just fully appreciating how special democracy is here in our own country, thanks to the founding fathers. Do you think it's at risk?
Yes. Clearly, it's a risk in other countries. Democracy is at risk in Russia, of course, and in Hungary, it's falling apart. The Middle East doesn't exist. China doesn't exist. And Japan, we rammed it down their throat, otherwise they wouldn't have it. And Germany has never been a great democracy. After World War II, we rammed it down all these people's throats.
I'll show my ignorance to some degree, but I forget which of the founding fathers said, democracy is a great experiment, and it's, such a treasure if we can keep it.
Yeah, they all had that fear. That our opening statement about Jefferson, that was his fear. It's too fragile. It's just this thing can be taken away just so easily. And Greece and they used Greece as an example. They had that great moment, and then orators and started turning the public's mind, and they became a corrupt mess. Really, a couple hundred years later, it all fell apart and never came back in Greece.
Yeah,
it really is fragile.
That is a warning to all of us, and I'm glad that we have this podcast series. I'm glad that people are joining us to listen, and I know we've talked about having people join us on the show, and having comments that we can reply to, that you can reply to. But it's important to keep that in mind, how fragile it is. So we will continue our conversation next time. But before we go, I just want to remind everyone that you can purchase a copy of Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, David Parker's great books, thought-provoking books, on his website, davidparkeressays.com, and also through amazon.com. So thank you, David. Really enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Thank you.